Hi, my name is Joan Mannick, and I'm going to talk to you today about studies we're doing at resTORbio to determine if our TORC1 inhibitor, RTB101, is a potential antiviral immunotherapy that improves immune function in the elderly and decreases the severity of respiratory tract infections, including COVID-19 in older adults. So these are forward-looking statements because resTORbio is a public company. So TORC1 is a protein complex that is an evolutionarily conserved mechanism that regulates aging. And the data for this is that in every species studied to date, in yeast, in worms, in flies, and in mice, if TORC1 is inhibited, lifespan is extended, and the organisms not only live longer, they stay healthier longer. And since yeast, worms, flies, and mice are evolutionarily quite divergent, this raises the possibility that this is an evolutionarily conserved mechanism and that TORC1 inhibition may also have benefits for human aging. So why do all these organisms live longer when they're given TORC1 inhibitors and stay healthier longer? Well, it turns out TORC1 inhibition improves the function of some, but not all, aging organ systems. So it's been shown to improve the function of the central nervous system, the function of the heart, the function of the aging immune system, and potentially musculoskeletal function because older organisms given TORC1 inhibitors have better mobility. So when we thought about how to test whether TORC1 inhibition has benefits in human aging, we decided to first look at whether we can improve the function of the aging immune system because immune function is something we can test in a relatively short clinical trial time frame. So I'm going to talk mostly today about studies we've done to see if we can improve immune function in older adults, but we're also doing studies to see if we can improve neurologic function, and particularly neurologic function in patients with Parkinson's disease. So as the aging immune system's function declines, older adults are more susceptible to respiratory tract infections. And in fact, all infections, but the most common infections in the older adults are respiratory tract infections. This is becoming quite clear during the COVID-19 pandemic, how much more at risk people are for viral respiratory tract infections as we age and our immune function declines. So we have done 2 phase 2 clinical trials enrolling over 900 people aged 65 years and older, in which RTB101 was observed, and that's our TORC1 inhibitor, was observed to decrease the incidence and or severity of respiratory tract infections. So in the first trial, we enrolled about 264 mainly healthy elderly subjects, and we saw that they had a 42% reduction in the rate of self-reported respiratory tract infections, or RTIs, while they were taking RTB101 as compared to placebo. And when we looked at gene expression changes in people getting RTB101, we found that some of the only gene pathways that were upregulated were antiviral defense pathways. And this may explain why the subjects were having fewer respiratory tract infections, because almost all respiratory tract infections are caused by viruses. The other good news was RTB101 was well tolerated in this study. The 10 milligram dose that was used is 1/120th the maximum tolerated dose in humans, and so it was, as expected, well tolerated. We then moved to a patient population in a phase 2b trial that was at greater risk for getting hospitalized or dying from respiratory tract infections. And we enrolled 652 of these higher risk patients. And we changed the endpoint. Instead of tracking respiratory tract infections just by having people self-report when they had one, we had strict diagnostic criteria for who did and didn't have a respiratory tract infection, and required that the infection be laboratory confirmed, which means people got a nasopharyngeal swab and we had to be able to detect a pathogen, and particularly a virus, to confirm they actually had an infection and their respiratory symptoms weren't due to other causes such as allergies. In that study, we saw a 30.6% reduction in the percent of people who had laboratory confirmed RTIs, and a 52.1% even greater reduction in the people with lab confirmed RTIs who had severe symptoms. We also saw a 5-day reduction in the time to alleviation of moderate to severe symptoms from their respiratory tract infections, and again, the drug was well tolerated. We looked in this phase 2b study to see, as we had seen in the phase 2a study, were antiviral genes upregulated. And you can see we looked at multiple antiviral genes in this study. And on the left, you can see the amount that these antiviral genes were upregulated in people given placebo for 16 weeks, and on the right, the amount they were upregulated when given RTB101 for 16 weeks. And almost all of these antiviral genes were upregulated more in subjects who were treated with RTB101 than in subjects treated with placebo. So what do these antiviral genes do? Well, this is a figure that shows the replicative cycle of a typical virus such as coronavirus. So the virus enters the cell, it uncoats, it replicates its RNA, it then reassembles and packages its RNA, and it exits the cell. So our body has multiple proteins that are made by our innate immune system and are shown with these red stars in this figure that inhibit all sorts of steps in this viral replicative cycle. And this is our first defense of our bodies against viruses. And these proteins that are shown by the red stars inhibit the replication of all sorts of different viruses. They're not specific to one virus. What's interesting is when we look at what are the proteins or the genes that are upregulated in people given low doses of RTB101 in our studies, it's these genes, protein encoded, or genes encoding the proteins in these green triangles. And you can see these proteins, again, inhibit multiple viral replicative steps. And that may be why we have seen this reduction in viral respiratory tract infections when people are given RTB101. When we looked at the specific viruses that were detected when people got a respiratory tract infection, you can see the number of infections caused by each virus in people treated with placebo in gray and when people treated with RTB101 in blue. And of interest, there was a decrease in coronavirus infections as well as infections due to several other viruses. COVID-19 wasn't circulating at the time we did this trial, but the fact that RTB101 decreases the number of coronavirus infections raises the possibility that it could decrease the incidence or severity also of COVID-19. That remains to be determined. One thing that's important when you're doing a study to prevent infections is that your drug is safe. And the good news was in both the phase 2A and phase 2B trial, RTB101 10 milligrams was well tolerated. So looking at moderate, severe, and serious adverse events or AEs, those are the more impactful adverse events that cause more harm. These were equivalent, the percentage of people getting these kind of adverse events were comparable between people getting RTB101 and placebo, again, showing that the drug was well tolerated. After this phase 2B trial, we talked to the FDA, who actually asked us to change our endpoint for a phase 3 trial. At the time, the FDA had thought what's important to people is not whether their infection is laboratory confirmed, it's just the symptoms that the infection causes. So they asked us for the phase 3 to decrease respiratory symptoms that were consistent with a respiratory tract infection, but could also be due to other causes and didn't matter if it turned out they were due to infection or not. We didn't hit this endpoint, and we have to figure out more why we didn't hit the endpoint. But the difference between the phase 2B and phase 3 results raises the possibility that RTB101 has a bigger effect on the incidence or severity of laboratory confirmed RTIs rather than just on respiratory symptoms due to multiple causes, not just infections. So in conclusion, in preclinical species, TORC1 inhibition has been shown to improve the function of multiple aging organ systems, including the immune system. Randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trials in almost 2,000 older adults have been completed to determine if TORC1 inhibition also, with RTB101, also improves immune function in older adults. In a phase 2B trial, RTB101 10 milligrams once daily was observed to be well tolerated, to upregulate innate antiviral gene expression and reduce the incidence of laboratory-confirmed respiratory tract infections caused by multiple viruses, including coronavirus in older adults, age 65 and older. And this data suggests that RTB101 has the potential to decrease the severity of COVID-19 infections in older adults as well. So thank you very much for listening.